Welcome to the Revenue Marketing Report powered by CaliberMind. This is the podcast for marketers who want to make their way into leadership. I'm your host, Camela Thompson, and today I am joined by Misha Salkinder. Welcome back, day 2, Misha. Thank you for still being here. We're going to be talking about funnel conversions and what works when. What pops to mind?
I guess some analytical sophistication that comes with just being more comfortable with making data-driven decisions in marketing. And, I think CaliberMind, our company, has been on this journey for a while now. When we started with attribution, and while it is a very useful set of models, it's a very useful tool to identify what campaigns you might want to double down on. I think the more sophisticated organizations have pushed us in the direction of funnel analytics and really asking more granular questions. What works for somebody who has an open opportunity with the organization in terms of getting them even farther engaged might be different than what works for those that are just getting familiar with your brand. And attribution models themselves can be tuned to look at the latter or the former. And we often recommend for customers to do so. But funnels allow you to draw lines in the marketing funnel and to essentially segment groups of organizations by their level of engagement with you, people or organizations. So it's really interesting how you have attribution, which I think of as kind of bottom funnel analytics. And then you have engagement, which I think is really upper funnel analytics. And then here you have the actual structure to be able to say, well, let's use engagement to draw certain lines in the sand. You can call those marketing qualified, sales qualified, whatever the terminology is. And then you use the mechanism of attribution or something similar to it to make decisions or to gain patterns of what happens within each one of these buckets. It's very interesting what one can see when taking this lens as opposed to what I would call an old school, campaign comparison via attribution alone.
It's funny, I'm having flashbacks to CaliberMind. And one of the things I struggled with as an internal marketer there was that we had all of these great views. What I was missing and what we subsequently developed was a more segmented approach to what works when. So with attribution, if we're doing full path or what happened well before the opportunity was created until it was closed, you do have a pre-op and a post-op. Mm-hmm. So you can kind of figure out what got people to engage with sales versus what got the deal to close. And that's great. However, I was really excited when we started layering in the more traditional demand gen waterfall stages, because within pre-op, there's a wide range of activities that need to happen before they'll even engage with sales. So if we think about that, a good parallel might be a lot of Salesforce people, they have either first touch or last touch attribution, and it is attribution, but first touch shows them, it's useful for understanding what first drew somebody in. And then last touch is pretty good for knowing what tipped them over into actually having a discussion with sales. And those two activities are extremely different if you have the data to be able to compare the two. Mm-hmm. I keep thinking of what we were talking about yesterday, and context is everything. So understanding what works when. So going back to CaliberMind, we had a healthy debate over whether we should do digital advertising to drive in-quarter pipeline. And I was a firm no. That's going to pay out 2 to 3 quarters from now. And instead, I pushed for webinar But it was great because I had the data to say, this is why I know what works when and how long it's going to take. Without that, you're possibly battling with the CEO that isn't aware of the changes going on in the market and how things have shifted, particularly in paid advertising.
Yeah, very interesting. There's also a data question there that,
Mm-hmm.
particularly attribution, it's very, very tricky to build an attribution model without over crediting the high volume campaigns.
Yes.
Um, because of the nature of splitting dollar amounts into touch points, the more touch points of a certain type, there are ways around it, but it is tricky. Funnels allows you to perhaps ask a more volume question, or even I would say an efficiency question. So the way I like to look at campaign performance by funnel stage is looking at a ratio of, we call them journeys. You can look at them as movement down the funnel. Looking at the volume of activities that happened within a certain event or activity type that move on to subsequent stages for a set of organizations. And looking at the share of those that moved on that interacted with a specific campaign type. So it's all of a sudden you're removing the dollars altogether, and that allows you to look at a ratio. It allows you to look at perhaps a much smaller volume campaign, but that seems to be much more efficient at moving things through the marketing funnel.
And I'm just thinking through ways to simplify this a bit. So if marketers walk away with one thing, what I would want them to walk away with is sales has this they're trained to be very mindful of their pipeline metrics. So conversion rates, velocity, which is not at all what physics is. And I've been lectured on that, but speed to close, speed from stage to stage, all of those things they know by rote. They can just quote it off that we need X coverage. It's going to take this long to close. And here's on average how much we close by stage.
Mm-hmm.
Marketers need to be just as versed in that information, and they need to add on. So for example, initially when I started at a company, we had 270 days on average from first interaction that we could track to opportunity create. By knowing who that first interaction was with, we could tailor our website more, and we got it down to 80 days, and we got the key stakeholders involved a lot sooner. So those stats are great for the board. They're great for your boss. I mean, I wouldn't make a slide out of it, but they're great talking points. But what's really important is if we're looking at the sales information and we're familiar with what sales is doing, we can get in front of when we're behind on pipeline very early in the quarter and actually do something about it. So funnel to me means more closely marrying what marketing is doing by stage in a way that sales thinks about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then that makes it a little bit easier to communicate.
Yeah, I know we've gone down a rabbit hole of complexity fairly quickly in this conversation, but you're absolutely right. I think a marketer that's just starting to think about this can and should take a step back. And I probably recommend very few marketing stages or funnel stages. Certainly with the leading question of, are there different activities that we should be presenting or offering or optimizing in each one of these stages? So, one could be maybe unknown, somebody who's never interacted with your brand before. And there's perhaps a very low level of engagement. And then perhaps, I might even just have maybe a higher level of engagement, and then after that, already opportunity stages. So I think even a 4 or 5 stage funnel could be more than enough to support sales, really, and make both the campaigns more effective, and yet have the concept be simple enough to get the entire organization behind.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I've seen organizations with 12 funnel stages. While I think it's great, it feels over-engineered, because if you cannot act differently to each engagement group, then it just feels like a lot of complexity and extra acronyms that you might not need.
Yeah, and I think it's really funny that sales managers often get a reputation for being data savvy. Not always, but often. And they're dealing with so much subjectivity when it comes to figuring out where somebody is on the buyer journey and how close they are to closing the sale. That's behavioral guesswork, not data. But because we collect information at scale and can use it consistently, we can actually get some really useful information out of it. And I wish more of us thought of marketing numbers that same way instead of this precise science. It's very comparable to a forecast.
Yeah.
Soapbox moment, sorry.
No. I think it does. There are diminishing returns about going too deep, of course, and like over-engineering even your funnel. But it could be a very, very powerful tool, both tactically, if you are able to, first of all, both strategically to show, how movement through the funnel, how things that you're doing this quarter are better than the previous quarter. But even tactically, if you were to look at, like, let's say your set of campaigns, let's say you manage emails, I bet that by having this framework, you will notice that there are certain emails or email types that are getting engagement in certain parts of the funnel better than they are in others. Mm-hmm. Right? Which makes sense. I think if I'm engaged with a brand, if I know them really well, the things that I want to consume from that brand probably are different. Right? In the top of the funnel, potentially you're likely want to just learn about the topic area. While if I'm really getting interested, then I want to know about the details, maybe what sets an organization, what makes them different, or how I can really become an expert in this, how they can help me on this deeper journey.
Yeah, that's a really great exercise for any marketer to go through. What do people want to consume at each point? But to be able to measure it, I think somebody said marketing without data is like driving without a steering wheel. And I really like that because I see a lot of scientists out there that are trying different things, but you're really only a scientist if you measure it afterwards and have some idea of what success looks like. So capturing the data, having it on a timeline, this is all super critical.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think that's actually a great segue for tomorrow's topic, which is why you shouldn't over-engineer your attribution model. Listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to the Revenue Marketing Report. Please tell 2 friends, subscribe, download, whatever you can helps. And for those of you looking for more great content like this, check out CaliberMind.com.